It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The apartment was completely silent, but Emily's eyes were wide open. She couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the sound of her own breathing. Her heart was beating fast, thud, thud, thud against her ribs. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like something is waiting. Then she heard them again. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. Someone was walking in the hallway. The sound moved closer and closer until it stopped right in front of her door. Emily pushed her blanket aside. Her bare feet touched the cold floor, and a shiver ran from her toes up to her neck. She didn't turn on the light. She walked toward the front door in total darkness, moving slowly so she wouldn't make a sound. Every step felt like a mile. She reached the door and held her breath. Her heart was racing so loudly she was afraid the person outside could hear it. Slowly, carefully, she leaned forward and pressed her eye to the small glass peephole. A man was standing there. He was tall, wrapped in an incredibly long, dark scarf that covered his neck and the lower part of his face. But he wasn't looking at the neighbor's door. He wasn't looking down the stairs. He was leaning in close. His face was only a few centimeters from the wood. He was looking directly into the peephole. He was looking directly at her, as if he could see through the door. Emily jumped back, clamping her hand over her mouth to stop a scream. She stood in the dark hallway, shaking, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. How did her life become a nightmare? Only a week ago, Emily's life was normal and quiet. She was a student, living a simple life surrounded by books, notebooks, and countless cups of cold tea. Her desk was always a mess. Textbooks with folded corners, small cards filled with German and English words. She was studying for the most important exam of her life. For Emily, this exam was more than just a grade. It was her ticket to a new life. She had recently left a very difficult relationship. It wasn't violent, but it left invisible bruises on her soul, a love that slowly changed her, until she no longer knew who she was. How many times had she said yes when her heart was screaming no? How many times had she buried her own dreams just to make someone else happy? Now she was finally alone in this small apartment. Sitting at her desk under the warm yellow light of her lamp, she often whispered to the quiet walls, "I won't let anyone control me anymore. I won't be a victim. I want to be free. I want to be independent." She believed that if she passed this exam, she would finally be the boss of her own fate. But the silence she needed was slowly dying. On the first night in the apartment, she heard the music, a strange melody, sad, slow, crackling, like it was playing on an old record player from the 1920s. The sound came from the apartment next door, apartment 4B. It slipped through the wall like a cold wind. Emily tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just an old building with thin walls, that her neighbor simply had unusual taste. But the music returned every single night. It always began at midnight. It lasted for hours. It grew longer and louder. Sometimes it was so clear, it felt like the record player was in her own room. Lying in the dark, listening to the lonely violin, Emily knew she had to act. The next day, she waited in the lobby until she saw her neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She looked perfectly normal, gray hair, a heavy bag of groceries. Emily smiled politely. "Hello, Mrs. Gable. I'm Emily, your new neighbor. I wanted to ask a small favor. Do you think you could play your music a little quieter at night? It's unusual, but it's hard for me to study." Mrs. Gable stopped. She didn't move. Then she turned and smiled. A small, strange smile. The kind people wear when they're hiding a secret. "Music?" she said. "Oh no, dear. You must be mistaken. I don't even own a radio. No speakers, no television. I love my silence. Perhaps you're imagining things. Stress can do strange things to the mind." She never looked Emily in the eyes. She glanced at the floor, then at her mail, and walked away. Emily stood there, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She knew the music came from that apartment. Mrs. Gable was lying, and from that day on, everything got worse. In the evenings, Emily stared at her books, reading the same lines again and again. And every night when she turned off her lamp, the footsteps returned. Slow, heavy. They always stopped exactly between her door and Mrs. Gable's. Emily would lie frozen, waiting for the sound of a key. But there was only silence. And then, the music. And that brings us to tonight. Tonight, fear was stronger than logic. She had to look, and when she did, she saw him. Emily stayed on the floor for a long time, listening to her heart slowly calm down. After a few minutes, she forced herself to stand. She leaned toward the peephole one more time. The man was still there. But now he stood in front of Mrs. Gable's door, perfectly still, was like a statue. Then she heard a quiet click. There was no key. The door opened by itself. The man stepped inside. His long, dark scarf slid across the floor like a snake. The door closed silently behind him. Relief washed over Emily. And then she noticed the mirror. A large mirror hung in the hallway directly opposite the neighbor's door. From the peephole, she could see the reflection clearly. The door opened. Yellow hallway light spilled out. But in the mirror, there was no one. The door opened and closed. But the man never appeared. No shadow, no scarf, no body. The man had no reflection. He wasn't a man at all. Emily slowly sank onto the cold floor. Behind the wall, the music began again. But now it wasn't sad. It was faster, louder, almost joyful, as if it were celebrating. Emily understood that her exam was the smallest of her worries. Something lived in apartment 4B, something that did not belong to this world. And the most terrifying part was the look in his eyes through the peephole. He wasn't just visiting the neighbor. He was waiting for Emily to look. He wanted her to see him.